Even slides, so you guys have to look at my ugly mug.
Perfect. Well, we're just gonna see your beautiful face.
All right, so here's the deal. How much time do I have?
You have an hour.
Oh,
Well,
I
you
don't
have
think it.
now 6 minutes short of 1 hour.
All right, I don't think it's going to take that long. But hello, everybody. Greetings from Atlanta. I committed to Laura at the Rocky Mountain Information Security Conference that on today, the 9th of September 2023, or it's November, I've lost track of time. But on this date in 2023, I would do a presentation on security strategy. I recognize from the years that I've been doing presentations that if I attack you by slides and we do death by PowerPoint for the next hour, everybody will be bored and dissatisfied. So I'm going to highlight a couple of points of interest. You guys can take notes if you are good students. Otherwise, you can listen to the recording and go back and pull the information out. But there is a model that I'm going to explain to you. And then there are questions that you should be able to ask in your security program. The model and the questions work together to allow you to customize a strategy that's relevant for your organization. In my day job, I spend a lot of time talking to corporate directors. I am a founding member of the Private Directors Association in Atlanta. I am an alumnus of the Corporate Board Readiness Program that Santa Clara does. As an alumnus, I've been an advisor for, they're on cohort 9. So I've been an advisor of board directors for 9 cohorts. And I recently spent an entire day helping prepare somebody that's about to be the board chair for a public company avoid going to jail because her CIO doesn't know what he's doing. Is not disparaging for the CIO. It's just there is a CIO in a specific company that doesn't know anything about security and is much more excited about technology than risk management. And my argument would be that the key function of cybersecurity is to manage risk within the organization as an extension of enterprise risk management, rather than having the CISO argue with the CTO and argue with the CIO about who's going to manage what technology infrastructure in the company. Our guide for this conversation as a foundational item is NIST 800-39. Laura has listened to me rant about NIST 800-39 all day, every day for the last 4 days. So, Laura, I apologize that you have to hear this again. But if you're not using NIST 800-39, you are not leveraging a standard of practice that integrates the entire company into the cybersecurity conversation, rather than security sitting as a abstract silo by itself off in the middle of nowhere. Within NIST 800-39 specifically, that is where NIST declares a 3-tier organizational structure. And what I have been arguing, what I've been teaching, and what I've been pounding the pavement declaring is that in that structure, it's the board and the CEO that sit at tier 1. It is their responsibility to establish the acceptable boundaries of risk taking. And then the C-suite is at level 2. So everybody who is a chief something within the company sits at level 2 in the 3-tier organizational structure. And then at level 3, you have systems, services, and applications that process corporate data. And unfortunately, the CISO is stuck at tier 3 because the CISO is doing security for systems, services, and applications. Now, the benefit of being stuck in the basement of the pyramid is that you also have business owners who are stuck in the basement, and everybody who is not in the C-suite is stuck at the basement. So we're all in the basement together, and we should work together to take the instructions from tier 1 to drive oversight and accountability by the C-suite at tier 2. And then the system owner for every system, service, or application in the business is going to be responsible for making sure the security strategy and the security requirements established by the board and the C-suite are applied to the system at level 3. And so there is a beautiful pyramid in NIST 800-39 that lays that out and describes all of the details. I will not bore you by reading a NIST document to you, but functionally, that's how that pyramid works. And so if we accept that the pyramid includes the CISO in tier 3 at the bottom, And the focus of tier 3 in that pyramid is systems, services, and applications that process data. It becomes important that we have a strategy that manages risk at a level deemed acceptable by the board and then enforced by the C-suite at level 2. So all of our work as security people, in my humble opinion, is the result of the business doing their job to define the business strategy and the C-suite doing their job to provide oversight and accountability. And if we add a topic, the authorizing official is the C-suite person for every series of information systems. So my accounting information systems, the CFO is the authorizing official. My operation systems, the chief operating officer is the authorizing official. Because the CIO is in charge of all of the technology infrastructure, all of my enterprise infrastructure and controls, the CIO is the authorizing official. But forcing those business people to be the authorizing official means that they have accountability in the process and they are going to care about the strategy that's developed. With that said, thinking about the roles and responsibilities, this allows the CISO and everybody reporting to the CISO to be service providers. So now security operations is a service, incident response is a service, security control assessment is a service. Everything that is something that the CISO manages within the organization is a service delivered to systems, applications, cloud solutions that store, process, transmit data at tier 3. And now the CISO doesn't have to argue with anybody because you're just a service provider. And if you don't like it, go talk to the board. It's not that simple in practice, but that's how it works in theory. And so if that is the approach that we're using, strategic planning focuses on how does security align its services to support the business, to help the business achieve the outcomes that were defined by the board, the chief executive officer, and the C-suite, and then everything becomes straightforward. Once upon a time, I had the opportunity to rewrite the certified CISO body of knowledge for EC Council. When I rewrote it, it was from version 1 to version 2. It's now on version 3. It's about to go to version 4. I'm still considered one of the authors, but the reason that I bring that up is that it was my brainiac idea to list goal-based strategic planning as the approach that the Chief Information Security Officer is going to use to align the security strategy with the strategy of the business. I have learned more since then because that revision of the body of knowledge was ages ago, but the original idea was that in goal-based strategic planning, you start with a goal or an objective, and then you work backwards to decompose that goal to identify your initiatives and your activities that you're going to perform to accomplish the future outcome that's desirable. That is not horrible, but is not optimal. Sean Murray listened to me rant about strategic planning for an entire week once a couple years ago, and my new favorite strategic planning model is called the driver's model. So if you're taking notes, I'm going to walk you through the 7 steps of the driver's model. And then as we go forward in the conversation, I'll walk you through how your documentation of the answers to the driver's model help you answer the 10 questions that the board of directors, the CEO, the C-suite, and all the business people in the company really care about, and what you are going to deliver as a valuable service to the organization. In the driver's model, step 1 is to be clear on your purpose. You have to be able to explain to the business, why am I forcing you to do multi-factor authentication? Because it is so hard. And so nobody wants to do it. It's extremely difficult to push one extra button. The business just wants to put in their username and password and be done. There's got to be a business justification that defines why are security things happening within the organization that are more difficult than everybody is accustomed to. I joke about multi-factor authentication, but it is a minimum requirement for insurability if you're going to get cyber insurance. And still in 2023, we cannot say that there is 100% adoption of multi-factor authentication in small, medium, and enterprise-sized businesses. And so you have a challenge because we don't have adoption. We want to get everybody on board. And so we have to have a purpose behind whatever the suite of security solutions is, or whatever the focus of the security program and what it's covering is going to provide to the business. Once you identify your purpose aligned with the business purpose, you have to start with an accurate assessment of where you are today. So, step two, accurate assessment of where we are today. That assessment often is going to tie into risk assessment because, according to the wisdom of NIST 800-30, that Sean also posted in the chat, NIST says in their guide to conducting risk assessments that you're going to do an assessment before an undertaking so that you understand your exposure. And you are also going to do a risk assessment at least annually or whenever significant changes occur. Appendix K in NIST 800-30 is the best way to document all of your findings from the assessment. And then that assessment that you've documented in Appendix K allows you to say, where are we and how did we get here? And where do we need to go so that we are in a better position? Step three in the driver's model is to create a shared vision. Not just a vision, but a shared vision. And so if everybody in the company is not on board with the vision of the future, you are going to lose engagement because strategic planning often applies to activities that occur longer than a year, often at least 2 years, sometimes as far as 5 years into the future. And so given the changing nature of businesses, culture changes, drivers changes, and everything else, you have to have a shared vision that everybody is attached to. If you're bored one day, I encourage you to look up the case study that talks about how the Sydney Opera House was built. They were 1,300% over budget, 10 years behind schedule, but everybody was attached to the outcome that was produced because they recognized the value of the Sydney Opera House for the nation of Australia. And so being way over budget and way behind schedule was overcome by having a shared vision about the outcome that was going to be produced, not sticking strictly to project management principles and saying, oh my gosh, we're behind budget, we have to stop. What ends up happening is that even though they were 1,300% over budget, it was hundreds of times X the value that was ultimately produced over the lifetime of the Sydney Opera House from creation to today. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build it. The Opera House brings in value of over $6 billion to Sydney, Australia. So there's value that's produced. Everybody has a vision. They stayed on board. They powered through over a decade to get to the outcome. You've got to have something that is as exciting for the business so that they stay attached to whatever it is that we're doing. Step number 4 is that you're going to identify critical success factors and barriers. One of the interesting things that I looked at related to SolarWinds' response to the SEC is they said, you clowns don't know the difference between the cybersecurity framework and NIST 800-53, which is part of the risk management framework. And so one of your barriers is going to be lack of understanding. We know this in advance because people say cybersecurity, but if they don't work in the profession, what they assume in their mind is Mr. Robot and foolish things developed by Hollywood, not the actual work that professionals are doing. So budget, resources, headcount, accountability, buy-in, all of those things are going to contribute to success. Lack of engagement, lack of budget, lack of resources, not having the right controls in place. There is a whole host of things that becomes barriers, and your reconciliation of the barriers and the success factors is going to help you develop a strategy that can realistically be achieved. Because I can create the best doggone ideal strategy that you have ever seen in your entire life, but if it's not realistic, we're not going to produce the outcome that anybody cares about. When we define our drivers, we have to think about in step 5, what are the key strategies that are going to get us to our vision? So if we have a vision, the example that I often use is that we're going to reduce cybersecurity risk by 25% over 5 years. I have to identify specific measurable things that we're going to do in the security program to reduce risk by 25% over 5 years. Sometimes it's linear, sometimes it's granular. I might start out with 1% one year and then 5% the next year, and then 10% another year, and then cumulatively it grows over time. In other situations, based on my drivers and my ability to deploy the strategy and execute it as documented, I might actually achieve 5%, 5%, 5%, and every year we achieve a 5% risk reduction such that at the end of 5 years, we've reduced risk by 25%. The amount of risk reduction is influenced by our ongoing risk assessment, so we can verify that action that we took today produced a reduction of risk in the future. And then we're going to do performance measurement using NIST Special Publication 800-55 to represent that we have reduced risk like we promised we would. In step 6, you're going to monitor. And monitor is just performance measurement. And our tool for performance measurement for security, because it's free, everything that I'm mentioning is coming from NIST because your tax dollars have already paid for it and you don't have to buy anything. But NIST 800-55 is the best guide that I've seen to develop performance measurement. NIST categorizes your security metrics into metrics that evaluate the effectiveness of policy and governance. And so all of your administrative controls and the way that you run the program has a way to be measured in NIST 800-55. They have efficiency and effectiveness measures that allow you to evaluate the effectiveness of your technical and physical controls that have been deployed in the environment. And then the last category is my favorite category and ties directly to strategic planning. What are the specific measurable consequences of a security incident? If our strategy is to reduce risk, then what we report in our metrics about the impact of a security incident or a breach or some other catastrophic event becomes the thing that motivates everybody. It becomes the thing that contributes to our shared vision. And now everybody is on board. Hey, I really want to continue to invest in the strategic plan that you have because it's reducing risk. And I recognize the risk because I understand the impact of doing nothing. And so your monitoring, supported by your reporting, supported by a good framework for doing performance measurement for information security, is very valuable as a matter of practice, but it addresses the monitor step in the driver's model. At step 7, you're going to have rewards and consequences, and that builds accountability. One of the things that Laura has heard me rant about this week is that where there is no accountability, there's no action, because if you don't hold people accountable, nobody cares. So if I can't get people to care at tier 1 and at tier 2, then as the CISO at tier 3, I am begging people to do something that they don't want to do, and nobody's going to make them do it. And so if you don't have rewards and consequences to build accountability, people are not going to pay attention. You start to lose people's engagement, and then your wonderful strategy that looks good on paper is not going to produce the outcomes that you desire to produce from all of the effort that you took to align your security strategy with the business to help the business achieve its goals, objectives, and outcomes. So the driver's model has the 7 steps. As a reminder, in case you're taking notes, step 1, be clear on purpose. Step 2, have an accurate assessment of where you are today. Step 3, have a shared vision that everybody buys into. Step 4, identify your success factors and barriers. 5, define your drivers. 6, monitor your execution. 7, maintain accountability with rewards and consequences. If you do all of those things, you are more likely to have a security strategy that has buy-in from the company and produces an outcome. And ultimately, the goal of the CISO is to align security with the business. So I worked at the CDC for 12 years. Our motto at the CDC when I was there was, we protect the science. And so there was a clear connection between what we did as the security team and what the CDC did as an organization. Works out very well. I know some stuff that Glenn used to do. We might say that the motto of security is we prevent people from blowing up because of energy and some of the other stuff that's going on. And so my strategy is aligned with the business because we're protecting the Department of Energy and everything that it covers. Or if it's railway, we're adding safety. There's just going to be something that connects the business people to the services that are provided by security so that the strategy is understood and you accomplish the goal. My 10 questions if you're taking notes. I actually did a presentation for ISSA 2 that has these 10 questions. I'll post a link for that in the chat. So you can take notes or you can ignore it altogether. But I think the questions are relevant to the conversation. These are questions that security must answer to support engagement. In cyber risk oversight was the presentation for ISC2, but it relates to engagement activity and ongoing support for the strategy that the CISO has built to deliver the right suite of services to the organization. So question one, what is our current level of cyber risk? How was it determined? Is it accurate? And what is the capacity for accepting more risk to achieve business goals? The first question deals with the issue of the perception of risk for business people, because business people are taught that risk is a measure of uncertainty. They could be positive or negative, and then things like optimism bias and confirmation bias cause the business to think that nothing bad is ever going to happen. And so, as part of the support of your strategic plan, making sure that you have communicated the level of risk, you provide the results of your risk assessment in Appendix K from NIST 800-30, which allows you to argue that it's accurate, is going to tell the business what's going on, and then you can estimate how much more risk can we accept in pursuit of our business objectives. If we can't accept more, then we're at the capacity, and anything more is going to put us out of business. If we can accept a little more, there's a lot more wiggle room. If we can accept a lot more, maybe there are things that we're willing to accept as existing security risk that the business just said, let it ride, and they keep going forward, and we get to wherever we're going to get. Question number two is exposure for the organization related to cybersecurity. Exposure and risk are slightly different things. I could have legal exposure because we're not honoring a regulatory requirement like privacy program management. Because we operate in the European Union, there are specific documented consequences associated with a breach of personal information based on GDPR, and it defines the exposure that we have for privacy program management. If we know what our exposure is, then we can also ask follow-up questions. What are we doing to reduce it? What funding and resources are necessary? And then that influences your strategy and what you ultimately develop for the company. Question number three is, what is the specific quantifiable business impact of known cyber risk and data privacy exposures? So if we've done a risk assessment and we understand our cyber risk, and we've looked at the impacts to the business, primarily on revenue, operations, regulatory compliance, and reputational harm, if we're specific and we've measured it using something like factor analysis of information risk, we can tell the business that I'm MGM, and if we have a ransomware attack, it's going to cost us $100 million. So can I have $5 million to build a real security program? I have no idea what is going on at MGM. I don't know their people. I don't know the quality of their security program. I think that their compromise root cause was a combination of a poor service management system as it relates to password resets. And because my background started in networking, they should have been able to stop lateral movement and privilege escalation within the environment. But I don't know the CISO. I don't know what they're doing. These are just guesses. But if I were a casino, because 3 different casino groups in Las Vegas have been compromised, maybe I could say, given the use of comparables, our minimum impact is $15 million because somebody paid a $15 million ransom. And I know that I can build a security program that prevents or eliminates our susceptibility to ransomware for $5 million or less. I know it's $5 million or less because I've read NIST 1800-25, which is the special publication dedicated to addressing ransomware and other destructive events in cloud environments. So there is something that is formally documented that reinforces my argument that ransomware is preventable. You just have to have the will and the support and the budget to do the things that NIST 1800-25 advises. And then if you really want to get fancy, you can do NIST 1800-5 to do IT asset management. So you know what your assets are, where they are, who the owner is, and then make sure that they have adequate protections installed on them at the asset level, working in partnership with the business owner to make sure that we have software and other solutions that are going to prevent the full disk encryption that comes along with ransomware in the first place. Question number 4 is, what level of exposure does our insurance cover? And to what extent does our security program address the minimum requirements for insurability to make sure our claim is paid if we file one? And so there's a long conversation about cyber insurance. Laura, if you remind me, the 2 articles that I had published in the Crisis Response Journal, I will give to the chapter. You have it as a gift. You don't even have to read the whole magazine. They sent me the articles separately. But insurance is a contract between the insurance customer and the insurance provider. The policy is all of the contract language. And in the policy, there are going to be exclusions. There are also going to be rules of the road to make sure that if you file a claim, the claim is paid. Part of those rules include, how quickly do I need to notify the insurance provider, in what format, and under what circumstances. Some cyber insurance policies say that notification has to be sent to the insurance provider if we suspect a cyber incident or a data breach. Some policies say once you've confirmed it. If you are ignorant of what the policy says, you are potentially going to do things in the execution of your incident response plan that causes a claim that's filed not to be paid by the insurance company. Also, some insurance companies make all of their decisions based on an insurance questionnaire that's binary. The minimum requirements for insurability are multi-factor authentication, EDR, some say XDR, but enhanced antivirus and automated response, encrypted and tested and secure backups, and a host of other things. Those are just the top 3 that become important. But your insurance questionnaire is going to ask you everything that the insurance company cares about related to claims that they paid in the last year. So every time the insurance company has to pay a claim, they're going to add that as a question so that they can avoid paying that claim in the future. If they ask a question and you say yes, and you have not done that 100%, when you file a claim, it's not going to be paid, and they might cancel your insurance. If they answer you a question in the questionnaire and you say no, because it's not 100%, but you do it in some places, if you have enough no's, you're going to be too risky of a customer, and they're not going to give you a policy. So it becomes extremely important that you understand what are the requirements from the insurance company and what are our obligations, and have we done everything that needs to be done, because that's going to influence some of your priorities at the very beginning of the deployment of your security strategy. Question number 5 focuses on, to what extent will customers be harmed because of gaps in our practices, and what are we doing to mitigate the risk? Whenever your customers are harmed by your failure, the regulator is going to throw the book at you. 30,000 companies were affected by SolarWinds' failure, because SolarWinds is not the only company that has had a major data breach that is a regulated company. I believe, but I don't have confirmation from anybody at the SEC, that they are picking on SolarWinds because of the number of people who were affected by their incident. Also, from a privacy perspective, if you do privacy program management, the entire scope of privacy is focused on the harm that comes to the data subject. And the more harm there is, the more penalty you face. And so a good strategic question to ask is, to what extent will people be harmed because of the way we operate? Which then drives the other question, what do we need to do to reduce the harm that other people face because of the way we operate? And the answer to that question drives budget decisions, and it drives priorities for the development of your program to support the strategy to meet the needs of the business. Question number 6, to what extent have we satisfied regulatory and contractual obligations? GDPR is a regulation, CPRA is a regulation. If you float a little farther north in Canada, you have PIPEDA as the privacy regulation in Canada, and that's just privacy regulation. Plus, you have 56 ways of doing things in the United States based on the National Conference of State Legislatures website that covers all the states and all the territories for the government's obligation to protect personal information and for businesses to protect personal information. There are a lot of requirements. And so there has to be some inventory of all of the regulatory requirements the company faces, as well as the contractual obligations. If your company has ISO 27001 certification, one of the things that the certifying auditor focused on was, did we have an inventory of all of the things that we agreed to do in contract? And how do we prove that we satisfied all those requirements? And so some regulators, some auditors, some investigators are looking not only at the regulatory requirements, but the things that the company has contractually obligated itself to do. The most common contractual obligation is PCI DSS. And yes, we have to comply with that if we want to process credit cards. But there are a lot of things that companies agree to as part of their relationship with other parties to do business. And at a minimum, you have to make sure that you've done what you've agreed to do. And because of third-party risk management, a lot of companies are placing security and privacy obligations on their customers and their partners and their service providers. And so you need to have an inventory of everything that you're subject to. Question number 7, how are we measuring the execution of the strategy, and do we remain on target to achieve the prescribed outcome? Now, we already said the NIST 800-55 is your performance measurement standard, but it's not just reporting the metrics. It's not just about how are we doing with our policy and the efficacy of our controls and the consequences of a security incident, but it's actually measuring if we want to reduce risk by 5% per year for the next 5 years, how do we quantify that risk reduction? Are we using factor analysis of information risk? Did we buy something from Ira Winkler and CYE? Is there another product that we've used? We have to find some way to measure the risk reduction so that we can talk about, are we staying on track or are we falling off track? Lots of solutions. Some come from vendors, some come from standards. I really don't care what you use, but use something so that you can demonstrate that you're producing the results. Question number 8 focuses on the specific industry sector that you're in and the requirements related to that sector. So if you're in critical infrastructure in the United States, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency has defined 16 sectors that all have unique requirements related to that sector. I'm a fan of DOE because I use their cybersecurity capability maturity model, even for things that have nothing to do with energy. But I was a chemical weapons specialist in the Army, so I hang out with the chemical people. I used to do water engineering from a security perspective, so I hang out with the water and waterway people. But each of those 16 sectors has specific concerns for the sector, in addition to the non-critical infrastructure sectors that have specific regulations. SaaS companies have expectations. Cloud security has expectations based on the cloud controls matrix. There are a lot of things that are going to drive requirements for your company, and making sure that you satisfy those requirements related to your company, the industry that it operates in, and the countries that you're located in is going to be important, because any gap that you have becomes part of the strategic plan. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration has a random requirement for data integrity that causes organizations subject to OSHA to have to maintain data integrity for any accident information, so that information isn't compromised before the injured party is made whole. But if you didn't know about the OSHA requirement, then you don't have a repository of information that is protected with good data integrity controls. And then if there's a compromise of that data, you violated OSHA. And who thinks about OSHA for regulatory requirements for their security program? But security is in a good position to support data integrity. So understanding all of the requirements for your organization based on your industry and all of those random nuanced things is going to provide good service for the benefit of the company. Question number 9 focuses on your capability to respond to cybersecurity and operational events, incidents, and data breaches. What this drives is testing your incident response plans regularly. What I see in a lot of cases is that people will do a tabletop exercise once a year. But how much does your environment change month to month? And given the changes that happen month to month, is waiting 365 days between tabletop exercises sufficient to make sure that our capability to respond to an incident is accurate and effective and reflects the environment that we operate in? What I prefer doing at a bare minimum is doing an incident response tabletop test exercise at least every 6 months. If the company will put up with me, I'll do it at least every 90 days. Sometimes attackers are going to help you test your incident response plan, whether you wanted to or not. But from a planning perspective, the more frequently you test your plans, the more quickly your response team is going to have the ability to jump into action as fast as possible. I know there are military people on the call. The idea was train like you fight and fight like you train, but there is nothing I did in the military that I only did once a year. They perfected the push-up because I had to drop and beat my face all the doggone time. And so if that worked for the military for the perfect push-up, which can be demonstrated by the numbers, then you can definitely do that for your incident response plan to produce a good outcome. The final question is number 10. What risks have management and staff accepted that require oversight from the board and senior management? The bane of my existence is shadow IT. And I hypothesize that everybody, the universal you, can completely eliminate shadow IT if the board had a policy that said any person who accepts risk on behalf of the business is personally liable for the risk that they accepted. And so if somebody uses a credit card to buy space in AWS and puts corporate data in AWS outside the management of IT and security, and there is a breach, and Gardner says that the average cost of a data breach is $3.4 million, then the company is going to hold that middle level manager who refused to follow the process accountable for the $3.4 million loss that the company faces because there's a breach of information that includes personal information or because there's a cyber incident that damages the company's reputation. The issue in a lot of cases with business people misbehaving is lack of awareness, lack of education, and lack of accountability. And if you report to the board the volume of risk that the company is allowing non-board members to accept on behalf of the business, it is going to produce a cultural transformation in my experience. But I am not a special daisy. I believe that everybody can pull this off. It just comes down to getting buy-in at the top and then pushing that buy-in down to the rest of the organization. I believe I have timed this properly so that we have 15 plus 2 minutes of Q&A. I hope that you enjoyed my ranting and musings. I will send Laura the link to the 10 questions that I highlighted because it's in a presentation that I've made publicly available, and the presentation on LinkedIn, you can just download the slides, consider it my gift. It is the outcome of discussions, arguments, and debates with the board people that I have the privilege of hanging out with on a regular basis.
Any questions? Can you guys hear me? Am I up?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Their minds are blown. They can't think of anything to ask next.
Oh, I wish, but I've just been playing around with 39, 30, and 55 on some cyber physical programs I'm working on. So
Excellent. Excellent.
This was actually a great review because I'm implementing this kind of stuff in products that I develop or I'm in charge of helping to develop in our industry or our company. And it is, it's amazing just how much information we have from NIST to support a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes that people make with NIST is they only look at the cybersecurity framework,
Right.
but you cannot build a program with the cybersecurity framework. You need the risk management framework so that you can select, implement, assess, and authorize all of the controls that are in a system. And the risk management framework forces business people to be involved so that the business can stop pushing off to security things that don't belong to security.
Could not have said that better.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Hey, if you guys weren't paying attention, the link that I mentioned that has the slides for the 10 questions, when I did it for ISC2, it was about what the board wants to know. It still applies to strategy. Those 10 questions lead to good conversations within your organization in multiple contexts.
I don't have a question, but I appreciate the topic. I I couldn't type fast enough to catch everything, so I'll definitely I'll be rewatching the recording to catch everything you said. So
Yes, and well, if you think of something later, please feel free to reach out. If you just say that you were part of the chapter, I will automatically accept your LinkedIn invitation if you choose to exercise the opportunity based on Laura's post in the chat.
will do. Thanks.
You do talk faster than I can write, so
It's all good. You have a recording.
I do.
And you know where to find me, and I'm happy to revisit things. This could have been a slide presentation. My notes were just typed on a Word document. But what happens if it slides is you pay me no attention and you just read the slide for yourself. And so I really wanted to activate your mind, your reticular activating system. If you've ever heard some other people give some great presentations, because now you're going to remember it just based on my hypnotic rhythm that I used in the discussion, the jokes that were sprinkled in there from comedy school, and just having a good time without death by PowerPoint.
Tim says in the chat, great presentation. Thank you so much. And Will is laughing out loud and he loved it.